Alright, let's dive in. Today, we are going to crack the code on one of JavaScript's most powerful and, let's be honest, often confusing features, the this keyword. And I promise, by the time we're done here, you'll get exactly how it works and how to make it work for you. So, here's how we're going to tackle this. We'll start with the basics, why our objects need to do stuff in the first place. Then we'll meet the star of the show, this, and get into its weird quirks. We'll also cover the one big exception, arrow functions, and finally, see how to use all this to write some really slick code. Okay, let's jump right into section 1. We build objects all the time in JavaScript to represent things, but just having data sitting there, that's only half the battle. Think about it. We make these objects to model real-world stuff, like a user with a name and an age. But a real user does things, right? They log in, they say hi, they send messages. So the big question is, how do we get our objects to stop just being there and start doing something? Well, the answer is something called a method. And honestly, it's a pretty simple idea. A method is just a function that you attach to an object as a property. It's how we glue the data and the actions that use that data together. It keeps everything neat, tidy, and makes a whole lot of sense. Okay, now check this out. On the left, you've got the old school way of defining a method. It works. But on the right, you have the modern shorthand. It's cleaner, it's shorter, and frankly, it's pretty much the way you'll always want to do it now. You just drop the colon and the word function. Easy. Okay, so that brings us to our next big idea. How does a method actually get access to the object it's a part of? This is where our main character, the this keyword, finally steps onto the stage. You see, for a method to actually do something useful, it usually needs to know something about its own object. Like, for a say hi method to work, it needs to know the user's name. And the way it does that, the reliable way, is by using this special keyword, this. Okay, everybody, listen up. If you remember one thing from this whole explainer, let it be this. This is the golden rule. The value of this isn't fixed. It's decided by whatever object is sitting right there before the dot when the method is actually called. That's it. That's the secret. In this code example, it shows that rule in action perfectly. We call user.sayHi. What's before the dot? The user object. So inside that sayHi call, this is the user object. And that means this.name correctly grabs the name John. See? It's all about what's before the dot. All right, now for the fun part. Let's get into why this can sometimes feel so tricky. Unlike in a lot of other programming languages, this in JavaScript is super flexible. You could even say it's free. This makes our code really reusable, but it can also trip you up if you're not paying attention. So you might be thinking, hey, why all the fuss with this? Why can't I just use the variable name, like user.name, inside the method? I mean, it seems like it would work, right? But that approach is actually really brittle. Okay, let's see exactly why that's a bad idea. We're going to walk through this step by step. First, we make a copy of our user object and call it admin. Then, just to prove a point, we're going to completely wipe out the original user variable. Now, what do you think happens when we call admin.sayHi? And boom, the code just totally crashes because the method was hard-coded to look for a variable named user, which doesn't exist anymore. And that is the whole reason this exists. If we had used this, it would have correctly pointed to admin in that situation and everything would have worked just fine. So what's the big takeaway here? It's that the value of this gets decided the moment you call the function. It's all about what's before the dot at runtime. This is what makes a single function so portable. You can write one method and then reuse it on a ton of different objects. Okay, so we've got the main rule down. But of course, in JavaScript, there's always an exception to the rule, right? And for this, that big exception is the arrow function. They play by a whole different set of rules. Arrow functions, they just throw that whole object before the dot rule right out the window. Why? Because they don't have their own this at all. Instead, if you use this inside an arrow function, it just looks outside of itself and borrows the this from the regular function it's wrapped inside. Okay, let's really walk through this example so it clicks. When we call user.sayHi, sayHi is a regular method, so it's this becomes user. Simple. But inside that method, we define an arrow function. Since it's an arrow function, it doesn't get its own this. It just looks outwards, sees the this from sayHi, and borrows it. And that's why it correctly alerts Ilya. Alright, let's bring it all home. We're going to look at a really cool, practical pattern that this enables, and then we'll recap everything we've covered. So, Picture this. You've got this ladder object and it has methods to go up or down. Calling them one by one like this totally works, but it feels a little clunky, doesn't it? A bit repetitive. But what if we could make it, I don't know, more elegant? Like chain all those calls together into one single smooth line of code. This is a super common pattern in a lot of popular libraries, and it's all thanks to this. And the solution is actually super simple, but it is so powerful. All you do is add return this to the end of each method. When you do that, each method call does its job and then hands off the object itself to the next method in the line. So ladder.up runs and then returns the ladder for the next .up call, and so on. It's just a beautiful use of how dynamic this can be. Alright, so let's do a quick lightning round of the key takeaways. Functions inside objects, we call those methods. To refer to their own object, methods use this. Now, the most important part. The value of this is set by the object before the dot when the method is called. It's totally dynamic. And the one big exception, arrow functions. They have no this, they just borrow it from the outside. And there you have it. Once you really get it, this stops being this confusing thing and starts being a tool for writing incredibly flexible and powerful code. It lets you reuse functions and create awesome patterns like method chaining. So now the question is, for you, how are you going to use this to level up your code?